Testing, testing, testing. Alright, motor power on equipment 203, passenger equipment safety standards module 5, passenger equipment safety standards subpart D, air brake test module 5. Alright, module objectives. List wheel defects that would trigger a single car test. Summarize Class 1, Class 1A, Class 2 brake test requirements. Single car test 238-311. The cars requiring single car test or any other tests, e.g., brake reservoir, brake cylinder, etc., may move within passenger ship at the next forward location where the test can be provided with the following conditions are met. Before the movement of the car must be visually observed with the both side to determine the brakes apply and release. Cars are appropriately tagged on both sides. Car is appropriately tagged on both sides. The required test is performed as part of the prior to car's next calendar day mechanical inspection. Single car test triggers. Be aware of the events for the trigger of the single car test. See matrix. Be aware that there are exemptions provided by the railroad. Does its part to prove that certain wheel defects were not an air brake system related. Class 1 brake test, commuter and short long distance intercity. Each calendar day, long distance intercity passenger train with a departure or originating terminal each calendar day or 1,500 miles of the continuous service, whichever occurs first. Long distance intercity passenger train with a miss of the scheduled calendar day, Class 1 brake test due to delay en route may proceed to the point where the Class 1 brake test was scheduled to be performed. A Class 1 brake test shall be complete with a point prior to placing the train back in service. Special concern is given to the late night commuter train. See matrix. Class 1 brake test adding cars. Each passenger car unpowered vehicle added with the passenger train shall receive a Class 1 air brake test. Unless written notice of the provided by the train crew of the Class 1 brake test was performed on the car within the previous calendar day, the car has not been off source of compressed air for more than 4 hours prior to adding to the train. The written notice shall contain the date, time, and location of the last Class 1 brake test. Class 1 brake test. Who and how? Class 1 brake test must be performed with a qualified maintenance person. Class 1 brake test must perform each separately in conjunction with exterior calendar day mechanism inspection. Mechanical inspection. Class 1 brake test shall be performed with the air pressure at which for the train will be operated not less than 90 psi. Lift for the car of the vehicle is moving at 238.15b. The 100% of the operative brakes are required for the passenger train to receive the Class 1 brake test. Brakes must be observed and inspected on both sides of the car, verified by the application release. Friction brake test must remain applied until the release of the brake is as initiated. Class 1 brake test. How? Check. Brake shoes and pads align correctly, proper thickness firmly seated firmly against the wheel of the disc. Piston travel the actuator with the prescribed limits. Communication signal system with two-way radio tested for the proper operation. Engineer brake valve with the control with the proper operation. Brake pipe leakage does not exceed 5 psi per minute. If the brake pipe leakage will affect the performance, emergency control stand with the dead man pedal function with it is intended. Class 1 brake test. How? Continued. Angle and cutout cocks properly positioned. Brake rigging does not bind or foul. Electro-pneumatic brakes function with verified with walking. Each car brake discs are free from cracks of the manufacturer disc manufacturer specification. Brake indicators are equipped with the operated intended. Brake pipe pressure changes are verified with the rear of the train. Class 1 brake test records. A written electronic record shall be maintained. Class 1 brake test performed with the FRA upon request. The record shall be named with a plate for the inspection conducted, or one central location shall be retained at least 92 days. But the record must contain the following information: the date and time of the Class 1 brake test was performed, the location where the test was performed, the identification number of the controlling locomotive of the train, the total number of the cars inspected during the test, with the signature of the electronic identification of the inspector. Class 1 brake test 238-315 when? Prior to the first morning departure, each communicator short distance intercity passenger train left the Class 1 brake test was performed in the previous 12 hours. The train has not been used since the performance of the Class 1 brake test, and the train has not been off source compressed air for more than 4 hours since the Class 1 brake test was performed. The commuter short distance intercity passenger train provided the continuous last night service being prior to the midnight may forego additional brake tests. However, the trains and type service shall receive the Class 1 air brake test before starting a newly daily operating cycle. Class 1 brake test performed with the start of the newly daily operating cycle of the train must receive the Class 1 brake test as some point during this current calendar day. Class 1A brake test who and how. Class 1A brake test must be performed with a qualified person, qualified maintenance person. Class 1A brake test shall be performed with the air pressure at which the train will be operated in life of the car. The vehicle is moving in 238-15B with 100% of the operative brakes are required with the passenger train receiving the Class 1A brake test. Each brake test must be observed and inspected to verify application release of the railroad to determine if the procedure is safe. If not, the brake indicators may be used to determine the set of the release of the car with the equipped, but the observation must be made by the walking the train. Class 1A brake test how. Check if the brake pipe leakage does not exceed 5 pounds per square inch per minute. If the brake pipe leakage will affect the performance, each brake pipe set releases inspection manual previously described with a multiple unit equipment. Emergency brake application for the dead man pedal or other emergency control devices function is intended that each angle cutout cock is properly set. Class 1 air brake test how continued. The communication with the brake pipe pressure chamber with the rear of the train verified which may be accomplished with the observation, application, or relief of the brake of the last car on the train. Communication of the signal system or two-way railroad tested for proper operation. Class 2 brake test 238-317 when all passenger equipment whenever the control stand you with the control of the train change prior to the train departure for the terminal complex of the passengers prior to the first morning of the departure of each of the commuter short distance inter-passenger chain with where the Class 1 brake test remains valid. Cars that have received Class 1 brake tests have previously calendar dates have not been off the shore of the compressed air for more than 4 hours are added to the train car's equipment that are removed from the train when the operator first takes charge of the train except in case of the face-to-face relief. Class 2 brake test who and how. Class 1A brake test must be performed by the qualified person, qualified maintenance person. Provided in 238-15, the railroad shall not use the hull of the passenger train with the passenger server the terminal yard where the Class 2 brake test has been performed or was required by this product to have been performed with any of the brakes cut out inoperative or defective. Class 2 brake test how. The brake check. The brake applied with the release for the rear of the train will respond with the signal of the engineer's brake valve with the controller of the leading control unit on a gauge similar device to the rear of the train cab of the rear unit indicating the brake pipe pressure chamber down multiple unit equipment the emergency brake application of the dead man pedal with the emergency control devices functioning as intended. Communication and signal system on the two-way radios tested for proper operation. You're running brake test 238-319 when, after all passenger train departs, assuming that the conditions safely permit, all passenger trains, whenever the control stand and use the control of the train and change of the terminal complex, the train is not in passenger service. Running brake test. The running brake test shall be conducted according to the railroad established operating rules and shall be made applying with the brakes in a manner that allow the engineer to ascertain whether the brakes are operating properly. If the engineer determines the brakes are not operating properly, the engineer shall stop the train and follow the procedure provided in 238-15. And this is the end of Module 5.